Matthew Schneider here with my wife, Megan Schneider.
Hello.
Since you were new, or not new to the area, but since you weren't born in the Holy Lands and you moved there from Tennessee, talk, I guess, a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Well, I moved to the Holy Lands in 1989, and it was a very different experience because I came from Nashville, Tennessee, which was a very big inner city. It took quite a while to get acclimated to the Holy Lands because everybody knew each other, and that was very different for me. It was definitely a very close-knit community, probably well into my high school years before I really felt a part of the community, only because my heart was still with my family in the South.
Is there a place in the Holy Lands that you look back to, has some very great memories for you or that you think of fondly?
Johnsburg. That's where I met Matt and his family, who took me in when I was 17. I became very much a part of the Schneider family, and it was a great experience for me. And when I think of home, that's where I think of home, is in Johnsburg.
Going through this project has really, made me think a lot about growing up there recently. And, some of the things, obviously, being more athletically focused that I was really thankful for is the relationships that I was able to form with a lot of the people in the area, because you're playing sports with them all the time. If it's baseball or if it's basketball or we had flag football, but it's all the same.
Which is when I first met you.
Right. It was baseball practice, and you and your mom had dropped your brother off, because I just remember seeing you, but then I remember your mom tearing out of the baseball diamond after she dropped him off.
And that's when you saw me and you're like, I'm going to marry that lady someday.
It didn't go quite like that, but I mean, it's, I think a lot about a lot of those guys, and if it's that I'm seeing, Scott Schneider, Sean Andrew, when I go back and see like Dana Wagner and thinking about, Jacob Schneider, I mean, Jason Schneider, and the families too, because you got to know the families as well. I mean, a lot of those guys, their parents coached us for years. Bill Schneider was somebody who was always around, and probably somebody I didn't appreciate as much as I should have at that time, but I definitely do now. And you just form this relationship as a community with them.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, when you see them now, it's like no time has passed.
Right.
And many years have been in between. But
yeah, I mean, sure, everybody's doing different things and has their own stories from the 15 years that have gone by since that time. But
when you see each other, you pick up where you left off.
And that's something I notice, like with our kids now, that they play in sports and things like that, but it's depending on whatever the sport is, or however they're registering. It's always different kids. It's not forming that same relationship.
Right.
Last year we had the opportunity to live in the Holy Lands again in Johnsburg for the summer, as we were transitioning to our new house. What do you think, or what do you hope with us having two small children? What do you hope that they have for experiences in the Holy Land? What are some things that, maybe if it's values or experiences that you hope that they glean from that?
Things that I really enjoyed about growing up in the area is that I know my children cannot have being in the city, but they could have in the country, is playing out in the yard unsupervised for hours on end. That was one really nice thing. Like, Kyla could go and play with the neighbor kid for hours next door, and I wasn't worried about her. Because when she was throwing apples at cars, we got a phone call from the neighbor telling us that our daughter was throwing apples at cars. And that's great, because when she got busted for it, she was in awe that we knew she was doing it.
And everyone has a story too about some point throwing, if it was apples or rocks or snowballs at a car and getting busted by the neighbor.
But it was great because somebody that was driving past knew Grace Wagner, and Kyla just so happened to be in Grace Wagner's yard. And they called Grace and said, hey, some kids are throwing apples from your yard. And Grace goes, oh, yeah, I know who those kids are. I'm going to call Joanne Schneider. And I'm going to call, the other neighbor next door. And before you knew it, we got the phone call that Kyla was throwing apples. And she was appalled that we knew that she was doing something naughty. And I like that. And I like the feeling of the community. I mean, Kyla could hang out with any kid in that neighborhood, and I don't need to know their background or their parents or anything because I know everybody in that area, they're good people. I liked Kyla going to Johnsburg school. There were only 5 kids in her class. But the whole time that she was there, she was very well engaged. She was very happy. She was very well mannered and so appreciative for things. And
plus she got to be another generation of Schneiders going through CPS.
Right, she was the 4th generation, which there's something to be said for that, I think.
I mean it's always a place, and I think people that move away from anywhere will always say, well, that's where home is. And that's absolutely how I feel about the Holy Lands. It's a comfort level as soon as you come over the top of the ledge coming back from Madison, and you start seeing now the windmills in the background. You just feel at home, and you feel
at ease.
Right. It's it's hard to explain, but anybody that's done that and made that kind of a trip knows exactly the feeling I'm talking about. Some of the other things that I think of that I guess were pretty neat was weekends always seemed to be this big adventure, because you would go to all the different surrounding towns, because you had to go to Marytown to go to the bank or go to Mount Calvary, and that was a standard Saturday trip. And you would go you'd go to the meat market. Well, even groceries. I mean, I remember growing up, and my uncle or great uncle Lyle had the meat market in Marytown, and when he was done there is when the meat market went out. But we would go there almost every Saturday at least that I can recall. It was probably once every month or something like that, really. But just being able to walk in there and have that experience, and you remember those smells, and it was just a social place too. So people would come in, and it wasn't that they were just going there to buy meat, but to be able to chat with Uncle Lyle and hear what was going on in the area, share stories.
See, those are a couple things I love about the Holy Land too. Like, if you go to the Pipe Express, every time you walk in, everybody knows who you are. Or if you go down to the local supper club, your drink is on the bar the minute you sit down, because they know I want a Malibu Diet Coke with Brussels sprouts, which is gross, but it's there. It's ready for me. They got it. When I go out in Madison, no one knows what I want or what I like, and they definitely don't have Brussels sprouts.
We had the opportunity to work in the restaurant industry there too,
right?
Which is
that's what there is,
right? It's a very important part of the culture there,
yeah.
the supper club or whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
And working like Blanks is where I had my first job at 13 busing tables,
right? And that's exactly it. You're allowed the opportunity to work at a younger age, where you're allowed to gain this really strong work ethic. You are.
It really is. You
really are. You're given that opportunity to do that.
Which at that age you don't think that's an opportunity.
Kyla's not going to be allowed to work prior to that age, even if we wanted her to. Not here. You're allowed to do that there. I have only been at my job since November. And it's June. And the other day I told him that Matt and I have been together 17 years. And they were like, wow, I didn't realize you were so old. I'm like, well, I'm not.
It's funny because I had a CrossFit class tonight, and usually after a Friday night class, there's myself and a couple other guys that'll go to we'll go out and have a beer at the brewery right next door to it. And we were chatting. One of the guys has been married for a year, and another guy is dating somebody. And I think one of the gentlemen said, "Well, hey, I've been married for a year," and said that's still the honeymoon phase. Is what Krupp and I like to tell Dan Schneider that he's still in all the time. He's gonna be in the honeymoon phase forever. But but they said, well, how long have you been with your wife? I said, well, we've been married for 9 years, but together for 17. And both of them just took that seat back, that couple inches back in their chair and looked at me really strange. Like, yeah, sometimes you meet them early.
And that goes back to the Holylands.
Definitely.
I think. Because everybody that you meet in the Holylands has been together that long plus. It just shows you that you put that dedication in and that longevity. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've done.
And I think even as we moved away, and, we've been in Madison for 12, 13 years now at this point.
13.
And I still find that I tend to try and gravitate to people that are from the Holyland area, at least. Mm-hmm. A number of the guys at CrossFit that I hang out with are from Fond du Lac. I mean, just being here, hanging out with Nikki, and so I don't know that it's unique to the Holylands necessarily, but for me, it's definitely something that I gravitate to.
For me personally, my mom and I were talking about this tonight. We were talking about how she does not regret the decision to move us from Nashville, Tennessee to little Calumetville, Wisconsin, because she feels like we are better people because we were raised in that area. And I 100% agree with her. And I wouldn't change it for anything.